Howdy, guys. I think that I'm coming to you live again from Dr. Toby's office, and this is going to be Dr. Toby kind of out on call. And hey, welcome. You know, we're here. We're still here. We're all still happy. We're still functioning. We're doing the best we can. What I wanted to do, because I've had a lot of people ask me after the last time I did this video podcast, they said, Toby, who else, can you come in and give us some feedback about what's happening, I guess, more locally here in the state of Wisconsin? And I stumbled upon a woman who is the executive director of a Restraining Order Law Clinic. And this is funded partially by the Department of Defense. And I thought it'd be fun to maybe talk with her a little bit about some of the problems that are happening with the stay-at-home order. And because people have been, locked up for so long, people are drinking more, people we know are starting to have secondary complications, medical issues. But one of the things that isn't getting talked about quite as much is that there is an increase in domestic violence happening, especially with children, as well as spousal abuse. And so I thought we should get the expert and have her come in. So I'd like to bring in right now Ryan Poe-Gavlinski, or no, am I saying it right? Gavlinski.
Gavlinski.
I'm gonna mess that one up a few more times, I think.
You won't be the only one, no worries.
By the end of our discussion. So, tell the audience a little bit about the work that you do, or maybe a background about where you're working right now, what the purpose of the organization is.
So I am currently the director of the Restraining Order Clinic at the University of Wisconsin Law School. I am part of the Economic Justice Institute, which is basically a law firm within the law school. So we are separate, that serves the poor or people who are can't afford legal services. My specific clinic, and I work with other professors as well, is working with victims of crime, working with the people who are victims of intimate partner violence, child abuse, victims of harassment, and me, along with the students, and I train the students, so it's an education component for them, but we help folks within the state of Wisconsin get restraining orders in court.
Okay.
So the students learn how to be actual lawyers, and we are also surveying the community where there's a very large need, as most victims will go into restraining order hearings without an attorney present with them.
Okay, right. And there's a split between that. When people go to court and they don't have an attorney versus when they do, what's the difference in whether somebody gets a restraining order? Do you know those numbers?
I don't know the actual numbers. I would say it's a good 50-50, and I'll tell you why. Because I've had a couple cases that come through the clinic that came to us after there was already a ruling. In Wisconsin, if there's a ruling by a court commissioner, you have the right to a new hearing in front of a judge without any reason other than you want a new hearing. And so sometimes we get cases where people who've sought a restraining order are denied, and they appeal for that. And that is sometimes when we come in, and we've had cases completely end on a positive note as opposed to the negative note. And when I talk to the legal advocates through our domestic violence programs, and they say really the only difference was the fact that there was an attorney there that knew what to object to, what was irrelevant,
sure.
And really what to focus on.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's definitely something that's needed for people. And for those that aren't familiar with the term domestic violence, can you let the audience a little bit know that it's not always what we think about in the movies of just, it's, the ex-husband or this person, coming over to the house and abusing them physically, smacking them around, or the child that's being, abused as well. What is encompassed in domestic violence, or when you have somebody get that charge, with a domestic violence enhancer on top of an existing charge?
Okay. So domestic violence, so the law and what I consider domestic violence kind of don't always connect. Usually what you're wanting to see in the court is either abuse or the threat of abuse, physical abuse, an impairment, things like that, where the bigger global, I think, definition of domestic violence definitely is emotional It's not, so it's physical. Actually, I mean, it's one of the easier cases to see. What we don't always see are the emotional, the constant trauma over time by someone who's separated from their families, who are told where they can go, what they can do. And you see that over time. So there's a lot of people that are experiencing some form of domestic abuse and they don't even realize it.
So that's good, diving into more of my realm, I guess, when I used to run domestic violence groups for years, both out in California, when I lived out there in Fresno, and as well as back here, and even down in Chicago area. But that's talking about the power and control cycle, where people gain power, they monitor where they can go, what money, even if they leave the home, child-rearing practices, what's allowed, what's not allowed. And a lot of people just think, well, that's, just old fashioned. The man's in charge. And as long as he's the king, I'll be treated like a queen. And they don't realize how much autonomy they've given up. In addition, I imagine it's name calling, it's gaslighting, where you make the person out to feel like that they're actually kind of crazy and their, view of the world is crazy. And and so it's encompassing of all of that. So I think a lot of people don't realize that it's not just physical abuse.
Well, and from an advocate standpoint and from an attorney standpoint, I have found that the cases of the significant emotional abuse or the psychological abuse to be, and I mean, you probably know this from your standpoint too, that they're harder to work with those clients because they are broken down a lot more than sometimes than people who physically get hurt.
Absolutely. And, research has shown in the past that the number of times somebody actually leaves, tries to get out of an abusive relationship before they actually make that jump and say, that's it, I'm done, is 7. So they really, maybe it's changed over the last few years, but last time I looked at it.
That is still the number that that I've researched lately, and that's what we teach to our students.
Yeah. So with this stay-at-home order that we're currently under because of COVID-19, have you noticed any changes since the order has happened? Have you seen some research on that? How has it been affecting people who are in these types of homes right now? And now the quote unquote perpetrator, the person who's more aggressive or is abusing, they're home more often. And for children, their escape used to be going to school or going someplace. And now there's really no escape because they're home all the time. Have you seen some data on that? Have you seen what's been happening?
What's interesting is what we expected to be happening isn't happening. So what we expected and I've been talking to a lot of our different domestic violence programs throughout the counties because we've seen a major decline in folks that are seeking our assistance. And I was reaching out to the programs and saying, are you seeing people coming in or are they just not coming to us? And last I checked, they're also on a much lower scale of receiving calls from everybody. And when we talk about why do we think that's happening, specifically in Dane County, the DAYS executive director up there said that the majority of their calls would come in during the work day of folks seeking assistance, and that is not happening at all. And we think that is basically part of the stay-at-home order, that if someone is facing domestic abuse, they're not given the access or the ability to call because they're home with that person consistently. It's actually been very concerning.
So what I hear you saying is that it's not necessarily there's a decline with the stay-at-home order in abuse or power control tactics that are being used. It's more that the quote-unquote victims, the people who are in these types of relationships, don't have access where they're really alone to kind of make those calls and to kind of get out. They're almost under the thumb more so right now. And that's why they potentially are not calling.
Well, then that's our concern. Also, if folks aren't wanting to go to hospitals right now, they're not wanting to go to doctors for minor injury, for injuries. So, if someone is getting hurt, that normally they would then be given access to services through domestic violence programs, through the hospitals, they're not getting that access either. We've also seen a decline in the reports of child abuse, and the concern is because children aren't going to school, that mandatory reporters such as teachers and counselors and people like that are not seeing children to even be able to see that something's not right.
Yeah, interesting. Play devil's advocate the other side and wonder if there's people that would see it as, hey, if they're not going to work right now, they're less stressed, and therefore they're less stressed, maybe they're abusing less, in which case there's fewer calls. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hypothesis, I guess, that's out there. I don't think it would happen, but maybe.
I mean, I would hope so. It seems like the world is trying to rally around each other right now and being very supportive. And I would, the dreamer in me would like to believe that, people are being nicer to each other, people are respecting each other more, people are less stressed. But when we've looked at the history of pandemics over time, that's not the numbers that tend to occur. People tend to get more stressed during a pandemic due to lack of a lot of people not working, money, possibly using substances, alcohol, illegal substances more.
Yeah. Well, and I've noticed too, in doing the actual clinical work over the years, that tends not to be the case. It's not as situational where it's just there's a situation. There tends to be a cycle with abuse where you have this honeymoon phase for a while. It's, seems great. Oh, it's so wonderful. And I hate to say it, it's usually a guy, not always. Abuse happens both directions, but tends to be usually men because we have more physical power over people, as well as referent power, monetary power. But it does get reversed sometimes. But you usually have this honeymoon phase. And then, it starts to slowly build and escalate until there's this blowout period. And then again, it goes back to the honeymoon and I'm so sorry, it'll never happen again. And that usually does not make it situational. So a lot of times victims will feel like, oh, if I just would have had dinner right, or if I would have just not spent this money, or if I would have had the kids quieter, then, it's my fault. And there's a certain amount of learned helplessness that they start to develop where they feel like no matter what I do, I can't escape both the potential of conflict as well as the situation where I'm living here. I'm scared that I won't have a home. I won't have a place. A lot of people don't realize I'm obviously a landlord and I have lots of property here in Wisconsin, that we have protections even within lease agreements for people so that if they're in a domestic violence relationship, that they are able to exit that agreement without, maybe you should finish that statement, without consequence.
Correct. They are able to remove, if they have a active restraining order, they are able to remove the respondent off of the lease. Landlords must work with that. And then a person can't be evicted solely for, problems being caused due to domestic violence.
Yeah. We're in this stay-at-home order right now here in Wisconsin, for those of you that are watching all over the country and world. And there's a big divide right now happening, not just here, but almost everywhere between should they be at home? Should they not be at home? Is this making it worse based on the numbers, both from COVID-19 and the deaths that are happening from that? And really, I guess we don't say we die from COVID-19. We die from secondary complications. Comorbidity is what we call it, because of smoking for 20 years or having congestive heart failure or diabetes. But regardless of that, I think the numbers are going to be debated for the next 20 years, whether or not we're intervening the correct way or not, based on the long-term outcomes and what's happening to people with suicide rates, with other types of problems as well. Do you have a thought about how this stay-at-home order is going to play out, whether it's going to end on the 12th, or is it going to go on to the 26th? I put you on the spot.
I debate that one in my head. I know we had some students from the university, from the law school, were part of that argument the other day. So that's been a kind of an exciting point for the law school. My thought is with the court that we have right now that it's probably going to end early. But I don't think that's just because it ends early. I don't think people are just going to go out and live life the way we used to. I think a lot of things are going to be changing. I think we're going to all be probably wearing masks a lot more than we used to be, and probably just not hugging people as much and shaking people's hands and things like that. So,
absolutely. So please state the organization again. And is there, again, is it a 501c3 or is it just right through the university?
It's through the university. So it's a clinical class that the students can take. Okay. We do not charge any fees. It's solely, and we don't actually ask for any income information because we are funded through the Department of Justice through the Victims of Crime Act. And so we are solely there to help victims get restraining orders, and that's what we do. Anyone can access, we have if you will go to the law school's website and you type in the VOCA clinic, you can find us. And our VOCA, V as in Victor, OCA, yes, it stands for the Victims of Crime Act. And if you go, and even if you went to the law school's website and looked under restraining order, you'll find us. And our numbers there. We have a website. Specifically, you can also request us to contact you through that website. One of the things we find that people tend to go through a lot of channels to try to get help when they're going through this situation. And so if we can make it easier for folks to be contacted and helped, then that's what we try to do.
Yeah, well,
and we are working, even though there's a stay-at-home order, and even though the students are going on summer break, we're going to have a summer term, and we don't stop.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. You know, bless the work that you guys are doing. You're doing amazing work. Rarely, but sometimes we'll say people do God's work, and I really do think that when people do that type of humanitarian work effort for the sole purpose of helping people out of difficult situations and abusive situations, it's something that should be praised. So thank you for doing that work.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Take care. So there you have it, guys. You know, from the attorney's mouth. If you guys know somebody, if you suspect somebody that might be struggling right now with some power control dynamics, if they feel like they need a restraining order, they're not sure what to do, go to the university website and check it out. They certainly can help you with that. It's an important thing that obviously we need to have here for people. I can remember one time I had a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, his wife had contacted me, you know, one evening and said that something had happened physically and was upset. And she, I think, thought that I was going to say like, oh, don't do anything, you know, settle down. That's not him. And I'd never seen any, again, I've been in the business a long time. You'd think I'd be able to pick up on, you know, people like that as well, but you never know. Behind closed doors, it's very difficult sometimes to know what really happens behind closed doors. But I told her the advice that I would tell any one of my friends or anybody who'd ever called me. Hey, if somebody, you know, physically harms you in some way and you have fear like that, you call the police. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's my best friend or my brother. You call the police immediately. We know that is the #1 way to stop violence and to reduce the rate of domestic violence. You can have a person plea, they can go to therapy, they can do all these sorts of things. The #1 way of reducing it is getting police intervention, especially if you come from kind of a white collar community, because the shame of that can be quite motivating for people. And you really do need to have that person not just quote unquote get help, but ultimately recognize that it's out of the closet and that you're going to go seek help, and it's mandatory that you have to do it. It's not something that changes overnight. It takes a long time. Group therapy is, I believe, the best and most effective way to work with people who have domestic violence and power and control issues. Having that peer support of other guys who've gone through it can be incredibly helpful. And you really shouldn't be doing couples therapy. There's kind of a debate sometimes in my clinical research or in the research that we use, whether that's appropriate or even unethical. The problem is that when you're doing couples therapy, so if you happen to be watching this and you're in a relationship where you do feel like that there is power and control dynamics happening to the point of abuse and or physical abuse or sexual abuse or towards their kids, couples therapy ain't the way to go sometimes. And you probably know why, because you're going to be less honest in those couples therapy, because the therapist can get you to disclose something or say something, and that will be used against you later on. They're going to end up, getting angry, and they might hold together in a session. Unfortunately, that, I've heard reports of where people had done couples therapy, and then it's gone deadly wrong afterwards because the individual gets so upset and angry for what was disclosed in the therapy. So be safe. This is Dr. Toby out on call. Remember, you guys don't have to be perfect. You just got to do a little bit better each time as we go. Be good to each other. I'm a work in progress. You're a work in progress. We're all a work in progress. All right. Take care, guys. Thank you so much.